Public education is really important for all of us because it makes sure that access to a basic education is not a privilege of the few, but is actually available to all children in our society.
Every child is a resource, and our role as educators is to try to help them flourish and become the best human beings they can be.
When we invest in our kids, when we invest in their education, we help make them better workers in the future, and that helps their future productivity and in our future prosperity.
What we want is every person to do the best they can and to learn to collaborate with one another and see themselves working towards a shared fate of a nation. Whether we do it well or not will have deep implications for the country.
The 1982 lawsuit, Plyler versus Doe, ruled that all students have the right to attend school in the U.S. No matter whether they're undocumented or legal immigrants or U.S. citizens, every child has the right to go to school. The state of Texas was arguing that it was going to cost money to educate undocumented immigrants. And the Supreme Court said that any money that they save is actually lost when we don't have educated citizens. And so it's not worth the savings, in fact, to not educate students.
And that was really based on the principle that education is fundamental to maintaining the fabric of our society, and that if children that were undocumented are denied an access to an education, then they would actually make up a permanent underclass, and it would really foreclose any opportunity for them to contribute to our nation in the future. The fact is that when we have the right supports and services available to them in schools, they are able to succeed and do really well. But it does require schools to be flexible and to be able to address those specific needs.
Building the infrastructure for supporting the students, for supporting the parents, for providing language access is really very time and resource intensive.
Generally in our classrooms, we don't have enough bilingual teachers or counselors or administrators who are able to communicate with kids or their parents in their language. And for kids who are unaccompanied and have recently arrived, many of them have already dealt with a lot of trauma. They may have missed many years of schooling as part of their journey here, or just have less formal education in general. So they technically have a lot of catching up to do. And so what we really need to do is be making sure that we invest in that system so that it's really meeting the needs of our students and realizing their full potential.
At the end of the day, we really want to provide the opportunities for folks to be able to sustain themselves, their families, and their communities. And for those that are left behind in the K-12 system or in high school, that makes it exponentially harder for them to have those types of successes. Even though there is a guaranteed education at the K-12 level for undocumented immigrants, that guarantee does not extend to higher education. Some states explicitly pass laws to prohibit undocumented immigrants from even attending higher education. Other states have open enrollment for undocumented students, but may make them pay out-of-state tuition, even though if those individuals were US citizens, they would qualify for in-state tuition because they live in those states and their families have established residency and their families have paid property and state taxes. In terms of the most progressive states like California, we have the opening up of scholarships and financial aid on top of in-state tuition availability. For the states that have opened their doors to undocumented immigrants in the higher ed context, there has been a bevy of benefits. And these universities and colleges are aggressively competing for student enrollment because it is a net positive gain for them.
The Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program that was instituted under the Obama administration helped address some of the barriers that undocumented students face. One, because it gave them access to legal status and to work permits. When you look at Dreamers, there is a perfect example of how investing in our kids and investing in the education and the opportunity of every child can really have great benefits for us. DACA recipients are going to college, working as teachers, doctors in our hospitals and our schools, as engineers in Fortune 500 companies. The fact that they had access to an education has shown us what can happen if we really believe in every child and give them the opportunity.
We have a dynamic of 100,000 undocumented immigrants graduating from high school in the United States every year. Many of those individuals are not eligible for DACA because DACA had a cutoff. As an undocumented immigrant without DACA or other forms of protection, you don't have a work permit, you don't have a driver's license, you don't have an ability to consistently make an economic living.
Students who are in high school and then find out that they might not be able to attend college, that's very distressing and disappointing for them, and that can often lead to them dropping out of high school.
For the people that drop out or do not have the support to be able to do those things successfully, what we're really going to see is them not earn as much as their peers, to not have available the careers that they want, to not be able to support their families, to not be able to expand the tax base or grow our nation's GDP.
In other words, we lose out on all of the contributions that individual could have made had they had the opportunity to realize their full potential.
At the end of the day, immigration protections are interrelated with economic security, which are related to the ability to thrive and succeed. We need to provide some sort of protection for undocumented immigrant students, especially for those that fall outside of DACA.
I've learned in this work that there are ultimately people who just fundamentally disagree with paying for things like a public education or really any public system. But for those people who understand that a return on investment can mean increased productivity, all you really have to do is look at the numbers and realize that if we have 25% of the child population, which is what children of immigrants are, not having an access to an education or a high quality education, we are setting ourselves up for a really bleak future.
When we think about education as a public good, as something that belongs to all of us, it becomes a little bit easier to understand why we want to ensure that all students are able to take part. Even students who get a degree and then get a job and raise a family and then they teach their kids and their kids have a really strong work ethic, that's a benefit to society too.
At its very core, education is going to be an investment, a promise that our youth in the future will be able to take part in our economy, contribute to their communities, and take care of their families. Every dollar in the context of education that we send out comes back to us multiplied in a wide variety of ways, whether that's a new business that gets started, a career path that gets fulfilled, a community that is able to have better economic outcomes. When you seek to strip education from undocumented students, at the end of the day, you're frankly just shooting yourself in the foot.
And that is going to put us in a really bad place if we're having to invest in supporting that segment of the population. So it's always better to invest in kids, and the research shows what long-term outcomes are. If we can ensure that every single child, regardless of their immigration status, their race, where their parents came from, has the opportunity to be the very best that they can be, that's the safest bet we can make as a country.
Today we live in a world where the returns to education remain the greatest investment a society can make. It is education that gives the tools, the sensibilities, the competencies for the next generation. In the here and now, you have to think through. They're going to be your doctors and your nurses. They're going to be your cops. They're going to be the people that will remake the fundamental social contract that is at the heart of the American experience. Either they will have the tools or they will produce returns that will make our country to be less than it can and should be. To invest in them is to invest in us, in our future.